talking about today. So it's all about what our Leisz family relatives encountered once they had gotten to Chicago. And as I was preparing for this today, I thought that maybe what we should do is go back a smidge and just see what they left before they actually got to Chicago. And one of the things I learned yesterday was that, let's see, I'm wondering, am I recording? Yeah, I think I'm recording. That
it shows you are.
Okay, great. All right. That our Leisz relatives actually left on Frank's 18th birthday on April 30th. So Leisz brother Frank turned 18, and that was the day that they boarded the Darmstadt, the ship out of Bremen, and sailed for America. And they wouldn't arrive until May 16th. So, okay. So let's take a quick look at what they left, where they left. This is, and I know, Sandra, you've seen this before, but most people have not. And this is actually the town of Peregu Mare as it looks about 10 years ago. It's in Romania. And what we did was we actually found the house of Leopold Leisz, who is our great grandpa. He's the patriarch of our family. And this is his house right here. So contrary to what I thought, and a lot of people thought, I think that our ancestors in Romania, even though they were of German ancestry, but that's another story. That's what we talked about last month. Were living in Romania. They were not, it looks like they were not farmers. Our great grandpa Leopold was like a magistrate in the city, and his brother Anton Leisz was a policeman. So I think they had some stature there. So when they decided to leave in 1893, let me just go to my little folder here. Okay. I wanted to show you a little bit about the beauty of Peregu Mare. So this is in Western Romania. And just in a nutshell, the reason that our ancestors were in Romania is because our matriarch and patriarch, who were born in 1835 and 1840, they were living in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in a different area, 350 miles away. And then they became colonists and colonized this area in Romania that had been seized from the Turks. So they ended up being colonists in Peregu Mare, and that's why they were in Romania. But this is a painting of the Banat Germans. And it's by a famous painter who has a gallery over in Peregu Mare. So if any of us ever go over there, we can see that. So it gives you an idea of what Peregu Mare looked like before they left to come to America. Here's just one more. And there's a whole bunch of them. I should put them up on the website. Let's see, where is that other one? Yeah. So you can just see, like, you know, maybe this is Anna Maria Schmidt Leisz's mother, and this could be Mary Leisz Minixhofer talking with Anna Suparitz Leisz, who is the wife of Leopold. I mean, this is what it looked like over there. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all right. So they decided to come to America, and the first 10 of them left in 1893. Wait a minute, I've got some problem with my mouse here. Hold on a sec. Oh boy. Thank you for your patience. I'm just going to switch out mouses here, see if I can get this to work. Okay. Always pays to have an extra mouse. All right. So, who are the 10 family members that came at this point? They were, as is shown here. So let's take a look at who these were. The people who stayed behind were two of the children, Leisz brother Leopold, his wife, and they already had some children. They stayed behind and came over in 1902. And the 6 Leisz brothers had a sister named Mary Leisz Minicksofer. She was married and she stayed behind and came over in 1900. But here are the people that came over in 1893. So we have our widowed we'll just call her our widowed great grandma, the matriarch of our family. Then her eldest child came over, John. He was married to Agnes, and they had 2 children at that point. Agnes was 8 months pregnant with their 3rd child. So here she is getting on a boat with being 8 months pregnant. Then they have a little girl named Julia, who's 4 years old. And then they have a toddler named Mary, who's 2 years old. And that's all John's family right now, plus the pregnant wife. Then we've got Joseph Leisz and Kathleen. This is our branches. This is my grandpa. And he was unmarried. He had just gotten done serving in the military there. Then we've got Frank Leisz, who is Sandra and Gail's and Peter's ancestor. Then we've got Anton, who is Julia's ancestor. And then we've got Leisz's brother, Michael, who's 10. And then a lot of people don't, well, not a lot, but some people don't know this. The 6 Leisz brothers, and then we always talk about their one sister, Mary Leisz Minicksofer. But they also had a little sister named Julia Leisz. And that was the last child, the youngest child of Anna Maria Schmidt Leisz. So there were a lot of Julias going on here. And I know Julia Greil, you're very proud of that name and rightfully so. Okay, so these are the folks that left. So let's take a look for a minute at how they might have gotten to, they left from the port of Bremen. Let's take a look here.
The peasants with a wagon and hay to take me away. The whole town was around my wagon. Everybody came to say goodbye. I didn't know how to say goodbye.
Poland, Russia, Romania. Never met the first one.
Okay. And then you have to go to unmute, start video, and mute.
On the way to the railhead, it was the passage to the sea. Some had money for the journey, and some did not. But turning back was seldom an alternative.
I didn't pay no ticket. Get out on train and pray for luck. They cared us just like you would care load a bunch of pigs. You're gonna move a bunch of calves, a bunch of pigs, and you put them in a passenger car. That's the way they looked at us.
For many, entering the great port cities of Northern Europe was like entering a new world.
They had reached the sea, and the Immigrant was now in the hands of the steamship company. Immigrants from the east and north swarmed into Bremen, Antwerp, Hamburg, and Liverpool to be processed for the passage to America. They stood in line together, those who saw America as an adventure, those who saw America as a beacon of hope. It was a business of numbers, an operation designed to house, feed, and process 4,000 people at a time, to identify those whom American authorities might reject and return to Europe at steamship expense.
First thing they do with you is delouse you. Look your hair on. Your hair, if there was a net in your hair, you'd have to shampoo.
During epidemics, huge facilities were established to fumigate clothing, baggage, and people. Processed and ticketed, they waited for their ship. They boarded in many parts of Europe and in many kinds of vessels, most to New York and some to other ports. But they had one thing in common. They were traveling steerage, and the steamship companies understood the profit in numbers. It began a journey that could last from a week to a month.
That was the last time it ever ran again. That was the last trip she made. She should have never made that one either.
crowded into barges and ferries. They approached the place that had become a legend in their mind.
I couldn't get my eyes on that. It's great. I'm kind of glad to see Palestine as bad as it was. It was good to see any kind of land.
According to the houses I left in my town, this was like, like a whole city. And I almost felt smaller than I am.
And when I came to these doors and saw all these people there, I figured, well, I guess I'll have to stay here for good probably, because all these people, what are they doing here? And nobody was happy. You don't know what's going to happen.
I had a coat and a dress and a pair of shoes. That's it.
One suitcase I had with me. And about $50, I guess.
My basket, my little basket, that's all I had with me.
You're lucky to have the one.
I'm going to post the link to this award-winning video. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay with everyone, is to move ahead a little bit, because what happens next is the processing of
this one from the Hudson River Pier
at Ellis Island. And let's see, toward the end of this video, it talks, let me just jump ahead here. What they do talk about is that they're checking people for disease, and they have to be vetted quite carefully. In fact, I had read that the people had to strip, and that must have been awfully difficult for you know, people in that era. So they were deloused. They had to be evaluated for disease. If they had a disease that was picked up on, they would have a chalk mark put on their coat, on their shoulder. And sometimes they were judged as having a mental illness. They would call it like neurology or something like that at the time, but it was really mental illness. So anyway, here, let's jump ahead to here.
and their last test. In his hand, the man at the registry desk held the ship's manifest. In his power, the right to interpret questions intended to identify those who should be let in or kept out.
You know, word of English.
I couldn't understand English, not one word.
First question, how much money have you got?
She had to have 5 pounds. My father, I remember, gave her that 5 pounds. Do you know how long? It took a couple of years, 2 and 3 years, to get that 25 pounds.
Mother, when we got nearer and the person at the desk called our names, my mother turned to me, she says, I was never here. How does she know my name? I said, it's all right, Mom. She knows it.
They asked for my name, and I told them Leisz. They say, how do you spell it? And I didn't know how to spell it, and they didn't know it, and they spelled it L-I-C-H-T. I said, it's all right for me. I don't know the difference.
But then they said, all right, you can go.
You're free to go.
To Hoboken. Yeah.
There would still be questions of what food to buy for the railroad trip to Chicago and the boat trip to Boston. It was still the strange names, the strange numbers, and the fear of losing one's money. It was the process of buying a ticket to places with unpronounceable names like Pittsburgh, Hamtramck, and Keokuk. But those were details. The island had passed them through. The door to America had opened.
It was as if God's great promise had been fulfilled.
I'm going into a free land. I don't think I ever can explain that feeling that I had that time. There isn't such a thing to be explained. It came out of my your system. It's over.
Okay, so that's about the end of this video. So you can see, let me just get to another screen here. Let's see. Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts on what we just saw there? Anybody want to share anything?
I just have a question. Denise, do we have a copy of the manifest from when they came over?
We have that. Yeah, I'm going to show that right now. Yep. Okay. Let's see here. This was the ship that they took over, which is the Darmstadt. They were on board for 17 days. And they left on April 30th and got to Ellis Island on May 16th. And on May 5th, so 6 days into the trek, John Leisz's wife had her baby on board. And that was his name is Joseph Leisz. And he died in 1968. And he's our famous cheesemaker cousin from Cameron, Wisconsin. Here's the ship's manifest. This will be interesting. So when that video was showing the people checking, you know, the manifest, let me just grab this here. Let's see. This is for our family. So let me blow this up. Okay. It was interesting how they said, well, I don't know how to spell my name. Spell it anyway. Well, we'll spell it this way. Okay, that sounds good to me, because the people couldn't write. And that's why there's so many different spellings of our Leisz surname. So anyway, here is our part. So name in full, this is Maria Leisz. And then as we went over in that earlier document, her son Anton is, well, he's listed as 7 here or whatever, but that's not right. He was born in 1880 and this is 93. Mihaly was Michael. He was born in 1882, so he should have been 11. Julia 5, she was actually born in 1885, so she would be 9. I'm not sure why they were making the ages younger. Maybe that had something to do with laws, or I'm not sure. Joseph is Leisz's brother Joseph, and he was 25. Agnes is the wife of John, Johann. So Johann is 31, his wife is 27. Frank is, well, he's 18. He left on his 18th birthday. The family departed. And then this Julia and Agnes, that's wrong. Her name is actually Mary. They put Agnes twice. Agnes is John's wife, and Mary is their daughter, who was 2, and their daughter Julia was 4. So if you notice here, they say that in terms of what they did for a living, Joseph was a laborer, he was older. Frank was a laborer, but nobody else is listed with having an occupation. Can they read or write? Joseph can. The rest of them say no. In fact, even Anton and Michael, the youngest daughter, Julia, no for John's wife, Agnes. Frank, so it looks like only Frank and Joseph said that they could read and write. They list their native country as Hungary, and that's because it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there was an effort at that time to convert the whole area of Romania there into where they live, the Banat, into, they called it Magyarization, where they were trying to make everybody be more Hungarian than German. Their last residence is Mensch Terez. That's actually Peregu Mare. That's what was one name that it was called years ago. It asks for their intended destination, which they say is Chicago. The reason that they chose Chicago was because Leopold, who stayed behind, Leisz's brother Leopold, his wife had her relatives in Chicago. So this gave the Leiszes a place to go once they got to America. Let's see here. Transient and transit protracted. I'm not sure. I think that says protracted. Now, this is very interesting here. Pieces of baggage, 3 for the entire family, 3 pieces of baggage. I just noticed that when I was looking at this earlier today. And then they had departed from Bremen. And it does note an extra person here, which is our cheesemaker cousin Joseph, who was born on May 5th aboard the ship. So that's the manifest. Go ahead,
Denise. When was this document written? At Ellis Island or before they left?
Ellis Island.
Okay, that explains my mom's parents. They came from different places, and but on the manifest they were right next to each other. So my assumption it was a shipboard romance, and they went through the process here together. So they came from different cities. They were heading. One was going to New York, one was going to Cleveland, and the next time we know of them was when they, I guess when my mom's older sister got married or was born. You know, so we have birth certificates like 4 years later. You know, so we don't know what happened between Ellis Island and the births.
Okay.
At any rate.
All right. So they get to Chicago. All right. And they take a train. And, you know, it's interesting. I just did some checking on what train fares were. And in the year 1900, when Mary Leisz Minixhofer came over, train fare for her and her 4 children and her husband was $40. And that was equivalent to $1,300 in today's money. And they didn't have the money. And so they somehow got word when they landed on April 24th in 1900, they got word to Turtle Lake that they needed money. And then they had to stay over 4 days in Quebec. They came through Quebec and they finally got the $40. So I'm wondering how much money did the 10 people, including then 11 with the baby, have to pay to get to Chicago from New York City? We don't know that, but it wasn't inexpensive. And it's a bit confusing because what we've learned is that their patriarch, our great grandpa, had died in a fire, and the legend was that he had all the money on him, and when he burned up in that tavern fire, that the money was lost. So where they got those funds from, I'm not sure. So they get to Chicago, 11 of them, including the newborn baby. And this is just a couple of things that I pulled from some videos. And I can post all of these videos if you want to see the whole thing. A city of have and have-nots. He called Chicago the filthiest slab he'd ever seen. Sewage dumped into the rivers. As you know, the slaughterhouses were very big in Chicago in the late, in the 1890s and beyond. And it was really filthy. In fact, what they've said is that today, many Chicago's buildings and streets are resting on 19th century garbage. So here's an example, here's a photo of the street crowds in Chicago. Now, can you imagine coming from this to this? It's a pretty stark difference, isn't it? So let's take a look. I'm not going to play this whole video, just a couple minutes of it, maybe 2 minutes of it, but I'll put up the whole link. I'm going to get rid of that music. So this is what our family saw once they got to Chicago. In 1893. It was like May 17th, 18th, 1893. So they had these trolley cars. Looks like they didn't have the elevated cars yet at that point. There was a mixture of, well, let's see. Yeah, there were the horse-drawn wagons were the only mode of transportation, I guess. Maybe bicycles and the trolleys. There was also a World's Fair going on in 1893. It opened May 1st and it closed in October. And at that same time, the World's Fair became notorious worldwide because there was a mass murderer going about the town, killing people. And so this is part of what our ancestors experienced as well. There was also a terrible economic recession that hit in 1893. So all of these things sort of collided to, I would think, give our ancestors pause about whether or not they should have come, or maybe they had their minds made up and nothing was going to change their minds. Let's see. Yeah, look at the crowds there. Okay, I'll post that in case you're interested to see more of it. So where they went to live was, we found out the actual place that our ancestors lived. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let me just go here. Okay. How many Germans were in Chicago at that point? Right here. Okay, in Chicago, this is for 1892. There were 400,000 Germans, 210,000 Irish. Germans were actually more respected within the city. They were craftsmen, they were skilled. The Irish, it was thought, were drunkards and poor. And a lot of them were, well, in the mid 1850s, they were escaping the potato famine in Ireland. But there was a lot of animosity toward some of the immigrants, with the Irish being close to the top of that and the Italians, but the Germans were well thought of. As I said, they were skilled. Let's see. Here's an interesting thing too, from 1892 among the poor of Chicago. The types of, I'm just looking here, the types of what people could do for a living. You know, you had dock laborers, and I believe this is the daily rate of pay. So our loved ones, our ancestors were dock laborers, and they worked on the grain docks for $1 a day, which they said was considered slave labor. But I think some of these other, you know, the ice wagon men, the laundrymen, the coopers, which is, I think those are like basket makers, or, you know, wooden barrel makers, etc. That was kind of interesting. Here's, this is a photo pulled from a Street Types of Chicago, Character Studies. This was shot in 1891 by this man. And this gentleman is actually in the employ of the gas companies. But I'm thinking, I wonder if Joseph Leisz and Frank Leisz and John Leisz looked like him, because there they were working with a shovel, probably on the grain docks, that luckily they didn't have to work in the slaughterhouses. That was horrific. But this might have been similar to what they looked like. So where did they live? They must have met up when they got to Chicago with Anna Suparitz Leisz's relatives, that is Leopold's wife's relatives. And here are just a few photos of Chicago in the 1890s. These were, the tenements did not have air. They didn't have windows. Can you imagine? I mean, we don't know if they all lived in the same flat. There would be 11 of them, including the baby. So you'd have, you know, a 9-year-old Julia, a 5-year-old Julia, a 2-year-old Mary, an infant. And then you'd have 5 of the Leisz brothers out of the 6, and then their widowed mother. And I can't imagine what that must have been like. I have heard that women would, you know, they weren't working on the docks, so they would do things like assembly work, piecework. They would sell things on the street corners, like needles and thimbles, like a little sewing kit for a certain amount of money. So perhaps they were doing that. The sanitation was terrible. Here are some photos. Yeah, that one is a little pixelized. The Hunter tenements. So, you know, you can just sort of think about this perhaps as what our ancestors looked like. And so they're living there together for about a year, from what we can best guess. And then tragedy strikes. Little Julia, who is the youngest child of our matriarch, our widowed matriarch, the little sister of the 6 Leisz brothers, and Mary Leisz Minnicksofer, dies on March 4th. She's living in that tenement with them. She was probably the big girl that was taking care of her two little nieces, the two daughters of John and Agnes Leisz, and maybe helping with that new baby. And here she succumbs to pericarditis and I believe it was rheumatic fever. Kathleen, you're a nurse, so you might be able to interpret this a little better. Her duration of disease was 1 week, and she's buried at St. Boniface Cemetery. She was buried on the 6th of March. Finding her death certificate was a huge thing for our family. That only happened in 2018, and Kevin Wick, our cousin, is the one who tracked it down through the Illinois State Board of Health. Her name is spelled wrong. It's spelled as Julia Laes. But in any case, one of the interesting things on here is that her residence is 20 Ewing Place. And that's why we know where the family lived. They lived at Ewing Place. Okay.
That cause of death, doesn't it say something like rheumatism?
Well, but that's not quite right. That was rheumatic fever. That was the way they said it then.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So let's take a look at, this is just some text that I prepared about when Julia died, that she had been sick for a week. She was 9 years old. The family was living in Chicago on Ewing Street. Internet research shows that this is Poverty Flat, a big double tenement. It was well named, dirty, ill-kept, evidences of neglect, slovenliness, unthrift in every angle, every window pane. It was fit for nothing but tear down. Never was a parody, corruption of human mind. I can post this, so if you want to look at it more carefully. But it says they cared less for these men and women than for cur dogs in the street. So can you imagine going from Peregu Mare and going through New York City and then coming to Chicago, which is filled with all this garbage, and having to endure this? In fact, I forgot to show you this earlier, that how dirty was Chicago. In the late 1890s, Chicago had 83,000 horses living and working in the city. And the manure alone was 1,660 tons of horse manure to deposit every day. And this is what it was like, 1890 Chicago traffic. So you can picture the Leisz brothers going into taverns after they got off the grain docks, after they were done with work. And there were German taverns. There were German societies. And I would think that they would have hooked up with that. There were also over 20 German newspapers at that time in the city of Chicago alone. And in those newspapers were ads for farmland in northwestern Wisconsin. And that's how they found out about Turtle Lake. But they're living amidst all this squalor. And they're seeing their kid's sister, their baby sister, die. And I would think, we're not sure the exact date. That's something we haven't tracked down yet, of when they left Chicago and went to Turtle Lake. But I would think after their kid's sister, Julia, died and they had to bury her at St. Boniface Cemetery, that they wanted to get the heck out of there. So they had saved enough money to go.
And how did they go?
They probably took a train, because Turtle Lake had, it had two separate train lines that intersected in Turtle Lake. So it's quite likely, in fact, just about positive, that they went via train. Here's some pictures of people from that series of That Man with the Shovel, just of people and how they looked in Chicago at the time. Character studies. So you had all kinds of different ethnicities, all kinds of languages. You had people selling rags. They were called rag pickers, that there was a lot of prejudice against. Poor families that were looking to bring in a little money. We don't know if our great grandma was selling something on the street to try to make do, to make a little more money. This is the time that the Salvation Army got started. It was an import. It began in Chicago in 1885 because they were seeing the horrible squalid conditions that the immigrants were living in. And also the impetus of social work, the field of social work got started around this time. There was no social work prior to this as a field. So, so that's about all I have. I mean, I've got some more interesting things about, you know, there was a lot, because the sanitation was so poor. They didn't have, there were a lot of diseases that would spread like wildfire. And I think the fact that they were able to get out of there and get up to Turtle Lake was such a blessing. So, you know, and away from the murder and the filth. So our ancestors endured a whole lot. You know,
sure did.
Anna Maria and Leopold, they, in 1862 or 63, they became colonists moving from their birthplace in Germany to Romania. And then 30 years later, Leopold had died, but Anna Maria took her kids and 10 of the family and became 11 on the way. Looked for a new life in America, but what they had to go through on that voyage, and even getting from Peregu Mare to the port of Bremen via river barge and wagon, horse-drawn wagon, then taking that more than 2 weeks, 17-day trip across the ocean, getting through Ellis Island, and then coming to Chicago and losing that dear daughter must have been extraordinarily difficult. So, does anybody have questions or anything they'd like to share or talk about?
I do, Donna. There's a book about the serial killer, and maybe a lot of you are already familiar with it. It's his name was H.A. A Devil in the White City. And it does have information in there about the 1893 fair also, and it does explain he killed women, and it goes in young women, and it goes into, you know, the facts of that time frame. But it's called A Devil in the White City, and the serial killer is H.H. Holmes.
How do you spell his last name, Donna?
Holmes.
Holmes, okay, great. Well, Donna's talking to us from Chicago, so I hope you don't feel like we really slammed your city here, Donna.
I'm going to get my shovel out this afternoon.
Yeah. And Leslie, your family's from there too. Go ahead.
I'm about 30 miles southwest of Chicago, and you're absolutely right. The conditions were terrible. The west side and near south side were just full of slums. The conditions were terrible. The stockyards also employed a lot of people, and you're right, that was a terrible job. The pictures are very, very timely for that period. It was just a terrible time to live in a crowded city. And yes, we can only imagine how coming from a nice area when they lived in Europe to coming to the crowded conditions and all the trauma they suffered. You can only imagine the PTSD, which wasn't known at that time under that name. They suffered terribly.
Fascinating.
Agnes, the wife who had the baby on board in 1893, May 5th, only lived a little over 10 years. She died in 1904. She was only in her 30s. So she left her family back in Peregu Mare and came and lived 10 years.
Well, some of the earlier addresses that you had posted, in particular, after this time, it was odd that my mom's family lived only about 1.5 miles from one of the addresses posted.
Ooh.
Of the Leisz family. And my mom and dad obviously didn't know each other at that time. And it wouldn't have been my dad, but you know, obviously the Leisz family. So that was kind of odd, because knowing that we spent a lot of time at my mom's parents' home, my grandparents, and knowing that within a couple miles of that, my dad's family had settled, was a new fact for us. And we found that very interesting.
Now you're talking about the 1930s when Kate Rudd went to Chicago. She was Leopold's youngest daughter, and Leopold's other daughter, Mary Ethel Leisz Fritsch, went to Chicago. And there were others, your dad, Alfred. And I wonder if the Leisz brothers were really sad when their children went to Chicago, because this Chicago of 1893-94 was all they knew.
Exactly. That was, you know, very sad, of course.
However, I'm sure they updated them, because when they went in the 30s, no one ever spoke of anything being negative that I recall. That, you know, yes, it was the Depression, but my granddad, Larry Rudd, Catherine's husband, he was very lucky, and so were many of the others who went there, because they worked in the bakery business. And the story was, my granddad would always talk about walking past these men standing in the bread lines and give thanks that he had chosen a profession in which he could work and was gainfully employed and making very good money. My mother had braces in the 30s, and no one had braces. She was, and so she was looked upon as a rich kid, but you know, they were just, I'm sure, middle class. But they took trips every weekend back to Turtle Lake. My granddad was a fisherman, and people would say, how could you get the gas rations to go on a trip? And my mom wasn't sure how to explain that. But apparently, because he had access to it from being in the bakery business, I don't know. But I'm sure word got back to the original folks that Chicago was not like it was for them anyway, as it was for our ancestors originally settling there.
Well, all major cities had slum areas, and as time went on, after the breadlines of the 30s and the Depression, certainly all communities improved.
Right.
Yeah, Chicago in the 30s was an exciting city, but I would think that, you know, maybe, well, Leopold was dead by then. He died in 1925, but, you know, some of the old folks at home might have thought that it was pretty bad still. But like you said, they were probably told different, that it had improved. Who else? Julia, any thoughts? You're muted.
There. I just, I know probably 15 years ago, I was in New York City and went on a museum tour of a, you know, pretend tenement thing or whatever, you know, learned all about it. And it was just Yeah, you can see how the disease would spread when there was just no ventilation, no windows, probably very little running water even or whatever. And yeah, it's crazy how they lived and survived. And I don't know, they probably thought they were blessed because they were maybe all together in the apartment and probably knew people who were worse off than them.
Mm-hmm. And maybe there were a lot of Germans living in Ewing Place there, you know. Yeah. Donna, since you're in Chicago, I wonder, do you know where St. Boniface Cemetery is, where little Julie is laid to rest?
No, but that gives me something to look into. And if it's within the city of Chicago or a nearby suburb, I wouldn't mind, you know, going and seeing if, in fact, there have been some cemeteries that have been covered over or the folks removed, such as in Lincoln Park, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that St. Boniface Cemetery still exists, but as soon as we're concluded here, I'm gonna look it up. You know? But I'm not. There is a Catholic church on the near west side that's called St. Boniface, but I don't recall ever hearing about a cemetery there because it would be within the city limits. Not that there aren't cemeteries within the city limits, but I don't ever recall hearing about that particular one. You know, like a small churchyard, like St. Anne's and Turtle Lake. I just, you know, don't recall. Now that area would be, I choose my words carefully, would be considered inner city. Not the very best of areas. So I just don't think, I'm thinking it was maybe in an outlying area away from the city limits at that time. But it's interesting to look up. In fact, I'm going to Google St. Boniface right now.
I can send you more information about it. On our website, on the page for Julia, at the top in the main navigation, there's information about St. Boniface, but maybe you can add to it. Anybody, Gail, what about you? You have any thoughts?
There. Well, our great grandmother, she must have been a very strong woman to have, you know, losing her husband and that. So her maiden name was Schmidt?
Correct. Schmidt.
Yeah. Actually, I have a very good friend whose last name is Schmidt, but that was her former husband's name. So anyway.
Sorry. The St. Boniface Cemetery is within the city limits. It's on the north side, North Clark. Probably take me about an hour, 20 minutes to get there.
Well, I can give you a little more information. She has no grave markers, so I'm not sure that it's worth going there. She was buried in a term grave, which is a grave that would be buried over in time by another layer of corpses. Right. So that's why when we installed a new stone for our great grandma at St. Anne's and Turtle Lake, we noted Julia's name on there as well. We wanted to, what do they call that? Exhume her and move her to Turtle Lake, but the man said there's nothing left to exhume. So, yeah. Sandra, you have any thoughts? Oh, you're muted.
Well, I just find it also very interesting, and thank you for all your hard work. It's amazing how much you have shared with us. And I did go to New York many years ago and went to the Tenement Museum too. And it would not be unlikely that they all lived in the same little house because they took turn shifts sleeping. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean their rooms were very tiny, yeah, and they just took turns, yeah, sleeping.
Oh,
and then they had to walk down all these stairs to go to the bathroom because they didn't have any bathroom facilities. So I mean, like big stairs, and I mean, like how you think, and to get water, you had to you know,
pull up with
well,
if they didn't have a window, they couldn't pull anything up through a window.
So anyway, so it's all very interesting. And I mean, like Gail said, I mean, she was certainly a remarkable woman to take on that adventure with her children and you know, to go to an unknown place and then having to go through Ellis Island. I mean, it's like cattle being herded and having to be inspected and, you know, and all that must have been traumatic for them.
They had to be inspected on the other side too, you know, in Europe. And one of the things I learned in Ellis Island, I forgot to mention, is that out of the 10 of them, or 11 with the baby, some of them might have been deemed not well enough to enter America, and they would have been shipped back to Europe on the same boat that took them at the ships, at the steam line's expense. So could you imagine them being separated? You know, Agnes and her baby could have been put on the ship and gone back to Europe. And out of all 11 of them, that the fact that they all made it through is a miracle in and of itself. Leslie, you have any other thoughts?
I was just wondering when the original Leopold died in that fire. What was the date?
February 13th, 1893.
Okay.
And then they left April 30th from Bremen. So the fact that they had to go from Peregu Mare to Bremen to the sea via river barge and horse-drawn wagon, that might have taken who knows how long.
Well, then why did my great-grandfather Leopold stay behind for so long?
I think he was in the war, wasn't he?
You know, people have said that, but I don't know that that's true because he already had a bunch of children. And he was born in 1863. So by 1902, what would he have been? 39 or 49? I'm not sure. I think a family man like that, because my grandpa, his brother, was in the military in 1885. So why would Leopold be in the military in 1896, 97, 98? It just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure why he stayed behind.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts? Tom,
Yep. No, not really. No, it's pretty interesting. I'm just absorbing.
Fran, hello. Hi. Fran is Leisz brother Joseph's granddaughter, as I am. And Peter, what about you? You want to unmute and say a few words?
Maybe he's muted. Oh, there he is.
Hey there.
Hi.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hi. No, so I've been kind of just the last couple, I think since I found the website about the family, I've just been really interested in learning as much as I can. And, you know, am like trying to decide if it's going to turn into a passion or hobby like my Uncle Robert has for our family's genealogy.
Yeah. He did a lot.
But I think it's like, for me, it's like if I don't learn from all you right now, then, you know, I don't know if I'll ever jump on it and really get into it. So that's kind of where I'm at. And so I'm going to just keep on kind of follow suit.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Your Uncle Robert, I've connected with him out in Denver, and he's a wealth of knowledge too.
Denise, have you shared with this group anything about the letters from the war that you shared with us?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody knows about those. They're on the website, and they weave quite a story. It's from our side of the family, from the Joseph Leisz branch, but it kind of gives you a glimpse of what it was like during World War II. Yeah.
Of course, what I found most fascinating, one of the people they talked about in those two letters was, one talked about the expecting child, the child that they were expecting, and the other one talked about the newly arrived child, and that was Fran.
Right. Yeah, my dad was writing to his brother Joe, who was 10 years older. My dad was in the service, and he was saying, hey, you know, how's all the little Leases, and how's your wife and the baby? And that baby is Francine Hayden here. So yeah, cool. Right. And, well, anything else? What would you like to hear about next month? I felt this was very appropriate for May, because actually today, May 1st, they've been on the boat for like one day. And in 4 days, little baby Joseph's gonna be born above that, you know, ship that's people are probably puking and everything on it. I couldn't imagine giving birth on that. So what would you like to hear about next? What is it like natural to say, well, how did they get to Turtle Lake and what happened when they first got there, kind of thing?
That was my thought. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Yeah, the problem is I don't know a lot about that. But I can scrape the bottom of the barrel and see what I do know about it, you know, where they lived, and if any of them went to school. Like the youngest Leisz brother Michael probably went to school in Turtle Lake. We can talk about that and what Turtle Lake was like in 1893. I think it was founded actually in 1898. So they arrived there before it was even founded in Barron County, and are considered early settlers of Turtle Lake. Julia, you might be the one that would know most about this, huh?
Well, I mean, I should, because I live so close there, but I mean, I don't really know a lot of details about it, but but yeah, I am curious. Although Denise, did you say that you don't really know how they got the money to buy the property in Wisconsin?
Well, they got it from working on the docks, I think. You know, they saved their money.
Yeah.
It was $1 a day, but how many of them were working for how many days? I think it was $10 an acre, right, Sandra? And they
each bought 8 acres, I think, wasn't it? $80.
80.
Oh,
they bought 80 acres.
Yeah.
But I think, well, we can talk about this next month, but I think that Frank was probably the youngest son that bought acreage. That Anton did not buy acreage. He lived with his mother at first until he got married in 1903. And then Michael was a little kid, and so he didn't, of course, either. So I believe it was just the mother, John, Joseph, and Frank. And then as time went on, Anton bought land. And Anton has an interesting story too, because he owned the Fisk Hotel in town. So we could talk about that a little bit maybe. So, okay.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'll post some things about this, the links, if you want to do a little bit more of a deep dive. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome.
Take care,
Thank you.
Have a good meeting.
You all.
You too. Bye-bye.
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 TV meeting.
Thanks for all your help.
Sure. I'll send you info, Donna.
Thanks.